You must bear witness to all you have seen. There's one thing you must do. I must get back to Rome.
The supposedly true story of King Arthur as depicted in an action movie, where Arthur and his knights have to go on one last mission before they can return to civilian life.
That as free men, we chose to make it so.
But as with anything, things go horribly pear-shaped. In a movie that goes horribly pear-shaped. King Arthur.
Finally. A man worth killing.
King Arthur is a 2004 adventure movie starring Clive Owen as Arthur, and co-stars, well, everyone. There have been many attempts to tell the story of King Arthur, though this movie purports to talk about the real King Arthur, as told to us by noted historical scholar Jerry Bruckheimer. I mean, who needs Simon Sharma when you have the producer of Pearl Harbor? It's not the best telling of King Arthur nor the most memorable, but at the time this video was posted in 2024, the movie was celebrating its 20th anniversary. Okay, so the word celebrating probably sounds a bit of a stretch, but it is actually accurate.
I want peace, Lancelot.
Also, I have a very, very tenuous personal connection to this film, which I'll talk about later in the video. There's a theatrical version and a slightly longer director's cut, which is a little less disjointed, and also the plot's a lot easier to follow. The director's cut on disc is the somewhat better pick than the theatrical version on streaming. Whether you make the effort to see a slightly better version of this film is a decision I'll leave up to you, your family, and your physiotherapist, Phil.
Best of three.
The film begins with a laborious setup. Basically, the Romans defeated the Sarmatians, took their kids to be used as Roman conscripts for a 15-year term.
Young knights, if you so choose, they may someday be yours to lead, just as your father before you.
So, a decade and a half later, so what's that, 89 years? No, sorry, 15 years. British-born Roman Arthur Castus and his Sarmatian knights are looking forward to finally ending their military service in Roman-occupied Britain and returning home. They save a Roman convoy being attacked by the locals, where Arthur's boss, Bishop Germanus, is apparently killed.
What a bloody mess.
That's not the bishop.
Oh, but no, it was just a decoy. Germanus lives. Hooray! Good for Germanus! On the other hand, it's not so good for the decoy. Germanus and his men are hosted by Arthur at his base near Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall was of course built by the Romans to keep the Proto-Scottish Caledonians out of Roman-occupied parts of Britain. But it also made getting a can of iron brew in a cafe in Bristol a really big palaver. Further north there was once another wall, the Antonine Wall. And south of Hadrian's Wall, there was Adrian's Walls, which was less a barrier and more an ice cream parlour. Arthur's team includes his best bud Lancelot, but there's also Bors,
Do we have a problem?
Dagonet, Tristan, Gawain, and Galahad.
Is this your happy face?
All of the action here takes place in the 5th century AD as the Romans are preparing to leave Britain, where they will return home to prepare for an influx of German tourists. Arthur and his men take their place around their fancy round table.
A round table. What sort of evil is this?
They think it's all over, they're about to receive their discharge papers. I mean, there's some really nice discharge papers on quality scrolls and housed in an attractive presentation box. Instead, Germanus shows his cards. Arthur and his men will have to undertake one last mission for Rome, otherwise they'll be treated as deserters. Of course, Arthur's Sarmatian knights would have to traverse the entire length of the Roman Empire to get home, so doing so without the proper paperwork would turn into a major headache. Arthur and his men travel north of the wall to retrieve the Pope's godson Alecto from his father Marius's estate and escort him back to Germanus. Marius, it must be said, is a right twat, who's apparently got a sex dungeon where pagans are tortured to death by monks. Arthur rescues the survivors, including a young woman, and orders a convoy of survivors and locals to be formed so that they can flee the invading Saxons. This young woman with perfect teeth who's been trapped in a dungeon has her fingers set by Arthur and very quickly goes from looking like death to just having finished a cover shoot for Lady Archer Monthly, the world's 3rd highest selling magazine featuring female archers. Her name is Guinevere.
Is there nothing about my land that appeals to your heart?
There are lots of factions. There are the Romans who are about to leave Britain and the Sarmatians fighting for the Romans, the local populace of Britons, and then there are the Woads from north of Hadrian's Wall who raid Roman-occupied lands. They're named Woads based on the blue paint they wore, though the people from what would become modern Scotland have more historical names than the modern Scottish have for the people to their south, The Woads are led by Merlin, who's said to be a magician, though he doesn't do all that much magicianing, and instead he's a far-sighted strategist who realises that the Saxons are the more immediate threat and that Arthur is the one best suited to dealing with them. If he could only just realise that Britain is his home and not Rome.
It is your destiny.
There is no destiny.
The Saxons from the north were originally from Germany, where they are led by the ruthless Cerdic and his ambitious son Cynric. The Woads hate the Romans and the Saxons hate the Woads and the Romans look down their noses at the Sarmatians, and the Sarmatians all make fun of Bors and his army of bastard kids.
Come on, all my other bastards!
In amongst all of this, Arthur is just a Roman who was raised in Britain, who wants to go home where he thinks it's all high-minded pursuits and education.
The greatest minds in all the lands have come together in one sacred place to help make mankind free.
Rome is dead.
But maybe Arthur will fight for the Britons after all. One of the movie's major set pieces has the knights and Guinevere facing off against a Saxon horde on a frozen lake. It's almost but not entirely predictable as to what will happen, but it's generally the best part of the film. One of the knights, Dillane, smashes a hole in the ice, which will of course weaken the ice and turn the invaders into Saxon-flavoured Calippos. The knights have earned their freedom, but Arthur's determined to take on the Saxons, with or without his knights. But of course, all of them turn up for battle in full cavalry battle dress. Guinevere and her off-brand Blue Man group join with Arthur and his knights to take on the Saxon hordes. But a few of the knights will fall along the way, including Lancelot, who's now Lancelost. But it is time for Arthur to face off against Cerdic on the battlefield, who takes about 90 minutes to die, or about as much time as you need to watch Biggle's Adventures in Time. Arthur and his team eventually prevail, but at what cost? Apparently the answer is the $120 million used for this movie that didn't fund the remake of The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes starring Frankie Muniz. King Arthur ends with Arthur having won the day, but a lot of his friends have died in the process. It's the feel-good movie of 2004.
It was my life to be taken! Not this!
Arthur and Guinevere marry, while Arthur is proclaimed king, where he offers a mission statement for Britons going forward.
All Britons will be united in one common cause.
King Arthur as a movie is at best okay, at worst not okay, at least less than okay. On a good day, it's a disappointing night at the opera, or on a bad day, something to watch on a plane, but only on the screen of the passenger in front of you as they flick between this and the map screen.
God help us.
The movie is desperate to be thought of as an amalgam of Braveheart and Gladiator, and perhaps there was a vain hope that people who loved the huge battles in Lord of the Rings might get their fix from this film, which of course completely ignores the fact that in King Arthur the only element of fantasy present was the one where the people making the movie thought this might be in the same league as those other films.
Your courage has been tested beyond all limits.
Yes.
But I must ask you now for one further trial.
Drink.
So, about that tenuous personal connection I mentioned at the start of the video. While I did not work on this movie, at the time I did work for a company that did a little bit of work on a long forgotten and perhaps best forgotten marketing tie-in. The short version, I was able to read the script for the film while it was still in production. At the time I remember thinking the dialogue really does not leap off the page, but I had hoped that the impressive cast would make it work. And then when I finally saw the film, no, it did not happen. The dialogue ends up as clunky as I expected. Lines that were designed to sound cool come off as inelegant as a hippopotamus tragically performing CPR on a waterfowl.
It would be good for you to mark my face, Saxon. But the next time you see it, it will be the last thing you see on this earth.
This was not a movie wanting for talent. Writer David Franzoni had written the earliest drafts of the film Gladiator. Director Anton Fuqua had come off the well-regarded movie Training Day, and while that film's acclaim got him the gig, it didn't keep the studio off his back. There were claims of trouble along the way, with things like the level of blood and grime in dispute. The PG-13 theatrical cut has little blood, while the director's cut has lashings of blood splashed around like Sam Peckinpah let loose in a blood bank. Many of the action scenes in this film are fairly well done, but I can't for the life of me work out what the point of the dirt cannon is. In some scenes there's so much soil being flung into the air, we can't be sure if this was a battle or a gardening show.
I've been living in this hell. But if you represent what heaven is, then take me there.
You have the basics of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, the barely there love triangle of Arthur, Guinevere and Lancelot, a throuple known as Argue-a-Lot.
How do you do that?
You have Arthur pulling out a sword, but here it's young Arthur desecrating his father's burial mound.
Strange women lying in ponds, distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
Merlin's there but doesn't do any magic, but this is set about 1500 years before the first magic camp.
It was love of your mother that freed the sword, not hatred of me.
What we ended up with was a relatively generic action movie with a cast where almost every one of them gained more notoriety in higher profile roles. Thankfully, nobody is known as the guy from King Arthur.
I belong to this land.
Keira Knightley was already a star by this point, and here she's channeling Boudica's sassy best friend.
There's a large number of lonely men out there.
Don't worry, I won't let them rape you.
Where she's given the floweriest language this side of an instruction manual for a floral clock.
You and I are not the polite people that live in poems.
Clive Owen was working his way up the British film and television industry, where, despite me loving his work and almost everything else I've seen him in, he's just saddled with some truly awful dialogue and clunky inspirational speeches.
You know nothing of the loss I speak!
In the script, Arthur is given very little of the humour and warmth of his knights.
That all the blood I have shed, all the lives I have taken, have led me to this moment.
Keira Knightley and Clive Owen in particular do end up with some particularly, well, not very good dialogue, where both try their darndest to make it not totally awful. Not to worry though, Clive Owen would soon star in Children of Men, the feel-good movie of 2006, while Keira Knightley would later star in Atonement, the feel-good movie of 2007. Neither actor is necessarily miscast in King Arthur, because it really is hard to think of anyone who could make these lines work.
You should determine that that sacrifice must be my life for theirs, so that they may once again taste the freedom that has so long been denied to them.
And the rest of the cast is just full of, oh, I know him. Ioan Grufford from Hornblower and Fantastic Four.
Wondering at your good fortune that all your children look like me.
Ray Winstone from pretty much everything.
I can almost taste it.
Ray Stevenson from Rome.
Devil ghosts!
Hugh Dancy from Hannibal and Law and Order.
Our duty to run, if it was ever a duty, is done.
Australian star Joel Edgerton.
It'd be a pleasure to put an end to this racket.
Mads Mikkelsen before Casino Royale and Hannibal.
You want to go out again?
It's also got Stellan Skarsgard grouchily mumbling his way as the film's villain, Til Schweiger as his supplicant son, and as Merlin, Stephen Dillane a decade before becoming Father of the Year in Game of Thrones. So, in the end, King Arthur was, thankfully, nobody's career highlight.
Is that the deed I am to be judged by?
The music by Hans Zimmer turned out to be way better than the film demanded, but despite the decent budget and the huge sets built by the film in Ireland, it only really has a semi-epic feel. It does feel like watching a TikTok version of The Two Towers on a cell phone.
Does this really work?
Much of King Arthur was filmed in Ireland, since Ireland looks more like Britain than Britain does, or maybe it was cheaper or some shit like that, I don't know. Looking throughout the canon of movies about King Arthur, a large proportion of them seem to have been filmed outside of England, whether it be Wales, Scotland or Ireland. Personally, I plan to film my own King Arthur film in the Simpson Desert, though of course, the script will need a few changes to suit the new location.
Who is this Arthur?
It is said he has never been defeated in battle. It is said he is a great warrior.
The whole idea of the real King Arthur is not a total fabrication, but there's enough fabrications here to qualify as light industry. There was a legend of Arthur as the man who led the Britons against the Saxons dating back to the time this movie was set, but later on in the 12th century, the more familiar Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of British Kings kicked off the King Arthur legend that we know. Other writers added to it, punched it up, added jokes, etc., until, in the early 21st century, poor Clive Owen was saddled with dialogue like this.
Seize the freedom you have earned and live it for the both of us. I cannot follow you, Lancelot.
When released in July of 2004, King Arthur didn't bomb outright, but it didn't do nearly well enough for it to be considered a major success. Released in theatres as a PG-13 film, there's some extra work done for home video, where some dialogue was changed around in a few places, some blood was added, and some of the motivations make a little more sense.
If you say so.
This director's cut helps the film a bit, or at least makes the story, the characters and the plot slightly less unlikable. It does not elevate this film into anything you'd want to talk about, which means I've wasted the last 13 minutes. So instead, we shall just make lots of puns about what this film should have been called.
Woads!
The Woad Warrior, or All Woads Lead to Rome, Hit the Woad Jack, We're on the Woad to Nowhere, or Goodbye Yellow Brick Woad.
King Arthur!
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Well, you have to know these things when you're a king, you know.